Okay, now we're continuing on analyzing my transactions, and we are going to be at transaction E. So anytime I spend money or use up an asset to make money, it's called an expense. So in the next transaction, we're going to look at expenses. And if you look at your spreadsheet, analysis of transaction spreadsheet, you'll see expenses written 5 times at the top right header. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill in the type of expense right above it. So here's what happened. Hold on, let's move to the next slide. On November 30th, I paid the following expenses. I paid wage expense for $21.25. I paid $800 for rent. I paid $450 for utilities and $275 for miscellaneous. So at the top, notice up here, we just wrote the names across the tops. Now you have 5 expenses and there's only 4 here. So I want you to leave one vacant right here or right here because we're going to use that. It's going to be called supplies expense. By the way, miscellaneous is always last. So I add up these 4 numbers and that means I spent $3,650. So I subtract it from my cash. Over here, I paid out $21.25 for wage expense. Make sure they're negative. I need them both to be the same thing. $21.25 negative, $800 for rent negative, $450 for utilities, and miscellaneous $275. These 4 numbers equal this. And then on the very next row, here's my balance. I now have $8,850 cash, my supplies balance, my land balance, my accounts payable, my common stock, my fees earned, and then my expenses. Notice they all have negative signs. Make sure you follow the negative signs. When you're done, remember, do not put this here. This just shows you what it equals. Do not put this on the sheet. So next we're going to move to transaction F. On November 30th, I paid creditors on account $950. What this means is I took $950 cash and paid the people I owe. The people I owe is called accounts payable. So over here, here's my transaction F. I subtract the $950 I spent. Now I have $7,900. And over here, I paid $950. Now I owe them $400. Okay, so after this transaction, every transaction you run a balance. You bring down your balances of all the accounts, whether or not you touch them in this transaction. Okay, hope you guys are following along. I will show you what your entire sheet should look like at the end. When we get, I think the last transaction is H, I'm not sure, but when we get to there, okay? Okay, now we're going to transaction G. G is the hardest transaction. Okay, so on November 30th, Chris Clark determined the cost of supplies on hand at the end of the month was $550. So what that means is I bought $1350 at the beginning, and at the end of the month, I only have $550 left on the shelf. So I need to subtract the 2 numbers. My beginning minus what's left over means I used $800. Be very careful. This is the hardest transaction because it'll either tell you how much you have left or it will tell me how much I used, which was $800. It is the amount used that you're going to subtract from your supplies. So I'm going to subtract $800 from my supplies, and over here in my supplies expense, I'm going to minus $800. And then I'm going to bring all my balances down again. Okay, so here's how much cash I have left. I have supplies worth $550. I have land at this value. I still owe $400. I have common stock. I have fees earned. Notice all my expenses have negatives. Okay, that's very important. Now, finally, we're going to look at the last column you didn't talk about, and that's called dividends. It should be on your paper. Dividends are when you pay yourself as an owner. So November 30th, I paid dividends of $2,000. So look for the money. I spent money, go straight here and subtract $2,000 from the cash. Go over to the dividends column and subtract $2,000. And then run your balances. $5,900 cash, supplies $550, land $20,000, accounts payable $400, common stock is still $25,000, dividends negative $2,000, fees earned, this is my revenue, plus $7,500, negative $2,125 for wages, negative $800 for rent, negative $800 for supplies, negative $450 for utilities, and finally negative $275 for miscellaneous. So just so you know, this is my equal sign. If I add up all these three balances, it's now $26,450. And over here, I'm going to add, subtract, subtract, and I'm going to end up with $26,450. So they equal. So here's what your paper should look like. A, B, balance, C, balance, D, balance. This is probably one of the hardest things there is, this sheet. However, after chapter 1, we're never going to use this sheet again. Okay, just so you remember. So here's some notes here. The effect of every transaction is either an increase or decrease in one or more of the accounting equations. Two sides of the accounting equations always have to equal. This always has to equal to here. Stockholder equity is increased by when a stockholder, you, put money into the business. It's increased by revenue and decreased by expenses. So my revenue minus my expenses equals my net income, which will increase my equity. And equity is decreased when I pay dividends to myself. Okay, so a couple more points on this thing. Stockholders' equity is broken down into a few things. Common stock or capital stock, the term's interchangeable, and retained earnings. So let me show you what they basically mean. Common stock is when I put money into the company in exchange for stock. Now, right now we are a privately held corporation. We will be a publicly traded corporation once we get to chapter 11 or 12, I can't remember. But right now we are privately held, so me putting money into the company in exchange for stock that I get. The second term, these are both accounts under the stockholders' equity. The second term is called retained earnings. Okay, so retained earnings means just that. Profit that I keep in the company. Retained earnings is the amount of profit after you have paid all of your expenses, including dividends. So remember, here's something extremely important to write down. A brand new company's beginning retained earnings is always zero. A beginning company's retained earnings is always zero in the beginning. Okay, so this ends our analysis of transactions, and so your sheet should be looking like this right now. Hopefully it is. I have this in an Excel file up on Files under Canvas. You can change these account names anytime you want, but this is what the homework's going to look like when you start it. Everything I lecture is exactly like what the homework's going to be.